We're both very excited to be here. As Krista mentioned, we've never been to Access. We occasionally have, I've been to Code for Lib a number of times, so it's really nice to see this community, and this is what I see as the sort of beginning of that Code for Lib community, and participate at this level. I'm Jason. This is Scott. And what we're going to talk about today is the possibilities that happen when we talk about what happens when we look at our book content in a different way. Okay? And our kind of central research question for this project has been, what happens when we start to network the book? What happens when we move it outside of its physical container? And what possibilities does that open up? A quick note, we recently we have a new dean, Kenning Arlish, who is part of our research team. He's the dean of Montana State University Library. And then we also have Patrick O'Brien, who's a semantic web developer. He hasn't been necessarily core to this project, but his ideas and the ideas of the research team have informed our work, certainly. So I just want to give a hat tip to our group. I also want to provide a little context. This question of what do you do with book content we're not the first, and we won't be the last to approach this question. You have people like Editorially, Pressbooks. O'Reilly just released an HTML5 ebook markup version, just kind of open sourced how they create their ebooks. Peter Brantley, who was with the Internet Archive, and I still believe they are running. There's a Books in Browser conference every October at the Internet Archive. If you're interested in these type of questions, it's mostly been publisher based, and that's another reason why we have wanted to bring this question to our development community. And then there's other efforts like Kickstarter efforts, like the People's eBook. So I'm really grateful to Heather and Caitlin for bringing up the idea of the codex, because it kind of saves us a bit of time. What we really want to talk about is where the codex itself and where these new emerging formats that we are starting to experiment with, where they can go besides the codex. And so is everybody kind of familiar with what the codex is? It's the idea of the bound, fixed print book, paginated, has covers, right? It's kind of a fixed entity, right? We want to look at the newer container, or new possible container for the book as the web browser itself. And so that was sort of our medium, that's our canvas. And then as we initially sketched out the proposal for Access, we thought a lot of our work would focus on the sort of front-end development, what kind of markup is needed, what kind of CSS is needed. That largely, once we found a framework, and I'll talk a little bit about that, that work wasn't the most intriguing question of the project. What we started to think about is what is a new data model for the book, and then you start to bring up the same concepts that Heather and Caitlin were bringing up with linked data, RDFA Lite in particular.
So I'm going to go back one more. So you notice that we put a new data model for the book in quotes. So that's not insignificant entirely, because part of what this project is reconfiguring what the book can be and what the book has been. So I want us to keep that in mind, book in quotation marks. So when I was riding on a plane recently to Canada, I was sitting next to a very pleasant woman who was happy to learn that I was a librarian. And so she was also very pleased to tell me that when she was a kid, she always wanted to, she always dreamed of becoming a librarian. But then she was also very happy to tell me that until she found out that librarians don't read books for a living. So I'm not making this up, things said by an actual person. So this is really important to us because books are, as librarians, books traditionally are so incredibly crucial to what we do, what we have been. So the concept underpinning this project is that the book is important, but the book maybe in its form is changing, but the book content is still very much there. So let's talk about the book a little bit. I'm going to kick back to Jason.
Okay. So the impetus also for this project had been we're in this transition moment, right? We are moving from the legacy of our print collections and what we can do with them, and that creates anxiety because that's part of our identity. Our identity has been a storehouse for books, for good and bad. And what I mean, if you look at that tweet, you can kind of see how our identity has been sort of understood within the context of book. Book is dead, library. Book is dead, library is dead. Right? Not necessarily. We all know that we are beyond. It's not just about physical containers, and we're not storehouses for physical containers. But there is a perception about, and our link to books is important. And that also puts pressure within our organization for the people who came into our organization, have maybe been habituated. Their jobs are based on physical processing. Right? We're starting to see this transition in our library. I'm sure there are other libraries that are much further ahead than we are. But part of our reasoning behind this project was to address that anxiety about what happens to the book, what happens to the physical container, and potentially bring in people that might not have been a part of a tech project in the past. So there is a bit of an agenda, I guess I would say, with some of it. And maybe that's too strong. I did want to hat tip to, I think Rachel mentioned Flickr Commons, and I think this is another good example of just this is our legacy, right? And the books go up to the ceiling, and how would the women even get up there to manage them? The legacy of books, you see this giant tome sitting in the front, the weight of the book, and that's kind of where we were coming when we were thinking through, does this make sense? Does it make sense to talk about book data, and what can we do with it? So the first thing we noted, this is an example of the codex, right? And you note how it is in itself, it's a form of technology. It's a way for the purposes of reading and capturing knowledge and information. This was state of the art, right? We moved from the scroll, as Heather and Caitlin mentioned, to this format, and this format has served us well for 500 years at least. But now we're moving into a different type of environment, a digital environment. I do want to note the sort of nature of the book is this static, fixed, bound item. Because that kind of plays out into how we're seeing what happens with digital data when you try and move it outside of this format. And then a nod to what has essentially been what we're interpreting as Codex 2.0. Because if you think through what our devices are starting to do, they've basically encoded that it's a version of the codex kind of put inside of a device. But it's kind of bound. They don't really talk about intelligent markup. It's not really linked outside of the item or the bound ebook device. So we just wanted to look at what does it mean if we start to push the boundaries of the container.
So when we think of the book as an information technology item, like what that means on a conceptual level, we sort of see that the book represents a data delivery method. It provides information access, and ultimately and fundamentally it's about building knowledge. So with this project we wanted to, and we're coming around to describing our project. So with this project we wanted to recognize the book as the fundamental shape and legacy and tradition of the book for libraries, but then also look at the web as information technology. And not to be too blunt about it, but it offers data delivery, information access, and it's about knowledge building. It's about sharing. And so we see a lot of consonance between the book and the web, but the web offers a lot more than the book does. So the web, exclamation point. We're so super excited about it. So this slide may seem basic, but it's really worth repeating for this audience, for everyone, everywhere. It's more flexible and extensible than a book and an ebook. You can do more with it in terms of shape, in terms of data markup, in terms of sharing. And the web browser is, in functionality, the 21st century printing press. So that's another link to the book. So previously, you'd have to be wealthy. You'd have to have a large estate. You'd have to have this huge machine, this printing press. And now all you need is a web connection. So this is really our connection between the book and the web. So let's talk about our project.
So finally, here we get to it. So the project itself, this was a history professor approached us. We work with digital collections in the library. Approached us and said, I want to create an ebook. And initially, she would have probably been happy with a simple PDF capture of the materials. And what she had was she had a class, it was a history of food in America. And what she was doing, the end project was a recipe. A student had to create a recipe of their favorite food, and then an essay about why that was their favorite food. And to us, that seemed like a perfect sort of candidate for rich markup, different types of markup that can create book material. So it came to us as MS Word. MS Word, we converted it to static HTML, and then the sort of end run of this project has been moving to dynamic HTML. And we've really focused on the idea of a book as API, the semantic components of a book, how do you mark up a book intelligently, and then trying to come up with linked data URLs, linkages, so that the book becomes kind of a knowledge graph. And that's the goal of the project. And the URL is there. You should also see there should be some tweets coming into the stream about some of the things we're talking about. So a quick word about the dev stack itself. The PHP, MySQL, TreeSaver.js is the broad framework that we used. We may be moving away from it. We may pick up on a different framework because it's been a little quirky, to tell you the truth. The good news is the data has sort of been decoupled, so we can move into whatever presentation layer we need to. There's some HTML5 and CSS3, and then the core underpinning of the book pages is structured data with schema.org. So here's a shot of a recipe page, and what you see here is you get to the viewer, the browser, common user, you get a sort of column paginated view, a very common view of page, but it's within a browser. It's got white space, it's readable, and the framework does that pretty well. The second page would be something like this. This is the full essay on the gingerbread related to that. So from the front end, you don't really know much of a difference. It is really nice in that it is responsive, so it moves between devices really easily. And like I said, we were going to talk a little bit more on the sort of nuts and bolts of CSS3. I pushed a number of what I would call very beneficial CSS3 elements or developing elements, CSS3 regions, CSS3 multiple columns, and CSS3 paged media. Those are the sort of benchmarks of how you create or how you can create page content in a browser.
So our central research question, what happens when a book content becomes networked? So we basically have seen three things happen. The book becomes analyzable in new ways, shareable in new ways, and really the most exciting part of this is that it becomes reusable in new ways. So let's start with analyzable. With a book in a web environment, you can apply all sorts of web analytics to it, which is really interesting. So this is clicky data from Crazy Egg, which is a tool that some of you may have heard of or are familiar with. It's really helpful for tracking user behavior through a website and on web pages. So with now, when we have our book pages in a web environment, we can see exactly how users are interacting with this content and with our structure. So we see here that users, with the gravity of clicks, are finding the table of contents and our previous and our next button, so that's good. We're also seeing that they're clicking a lot inside the page, which is sort of interesting because that lets us know that in some ways users want to see stuff there. They want to see clickable items. They want to see clickable actions. So we could take this data and help improve this book reading experience by creating more linked objects, things like that. We also have Google Analytics on our book. So this is the visitor flow view of Google Analytics. So this allows us actually to see where users start up in the top left at our main landing page for the book, and then exactly how they move through the book. So we can stretch this out to any number of pages, and we can actually track how users are moving through page to page in our book. And this allows us to understand the readers a little bit better, understand how they're interacting with this content, with this book structure, and ultimately, hopefully, improve the book reading experience on the web for these users. Then this is just a pretty general Google Analytics view. We can see who's coming to our book, how long they're staying. So this is data that's just not available if the book is not in this networked environment. We can also see referral data for our book. So once the content gets out to the web, we can see who's linking to it, where they're coming to it. And so this is really interesting because it sort of lets us see the propagation of this book throughout the web, which is fun. So the next thing we saw is that it's shareable. So the sub element of this slide is in parentheses, but it's actually really important. So humans and machines. So we're sharing book content with other humans, but we're also sharing the content in new ways with machine readers, with machine indexers. So with humans, what this allows us to do is deep link the book. So we can harass and harness the URL with the book in this kind of environment. So we have toc.html at the top, so that's just our table of contents. And then all the way down to item 1, which is just the first recipe, the first essay. So what this allows us to do is share a book as easily as you can share a web page. So that in itself is not necessarily an advanced concept, but it's part of what makes the book better in a browser, is that you can take individual parts of it and you can share them around the web. So basic but really important still. And then in terms of sharing with machines, we could sort of see that. So at the very top, schema.org or recipe. So we're letting machines know that this is a recipe because we as humans, we can see what a recipe looks like. We're so familiar with it. We know how to parse that. Machines don't necessarily know how to without a little bit of help. So we've added schema.org, and we started with microdata, but we've sort of moved away from that. So if anyone's curious about learning more, we'll be glad to talk about it. So what we did here is we plug and played with RDFA Lite into our previous microdata semantic markup. So cook time, cooking method, recipe category. And so then when we put this into a structured data reader, it looks like this. So web indexers, this is from Google. This is Google's rich snippets testing tool. So they can immediately know more about our recipe content with just a little bit of structured data markup. And so then when you're sharing around the web, you get search results that just look a little bit better and look a little more meaningful to human readers with the help of the structured data markup. So we have a cook time. We have an image associated with this recipe. So these are all things that we see that we think make the book in some ways a better experience in the browser in a networked environment. And so that aspect of machine readability is really important for this last part, the reusability of book content.
Comes the rain. So that reusability part of it, we started to
shred it.
Shred it. One of the concepts that came to us, or we kept talking about, was this atomization of the book, breaking the pieces of, and not at a sentence level, because that's, I mean, thinking about the weight of that type of markup and the work behind that type of markup, but at the very least, thinking through how you can create different pieces, expose different pieces of the book to become a development platform. And so we did start creating a very basic API into a lot of the data. So what you see behind me is a call to the API that's part of the book. And this is for a particular item in a particular format. So this is the XML format of the gingerbread. So you can kind of get a sense of all the data that's inside of our database. But that's exposed, and then now this becomes hackable, reusable, right? Same thing, same representation with JSON. So, and you can kind of see that the API calls are down below, so you can kind of get a sense of that. That's been one of the, I wasn't feeling well yesterday afternoon. I did miss Calvin's and the SFU Open API. But one of the things we're struggling with right now is finalizing some of the documentation, just so that people know that these API calls exist. But decoupling it from markup and exposing the data that we have inside of our database was a goal towards with the end part of the project. And what this means is that every piece of data within the book has an actually machine readable component. Right? It has a URL that gives you a machine-readable display. So, as I kind of mentioned, we thought our focus was going to be more on front-end development and display and how that works. What became more of our focus was this possibilities with the data model itself as you move into a networked environment. And if you think through the rich markup that we have on the pages, the API, the actual API calls, we're really promoting this idea of website as API, book as API. That is, you look at the markup that we have on the page, there are newer specs related to HTML5 with microdata. The DOM API, you can actually try to move through the DOM and parse it that way. You could use the API that we're starting to build around this data. And we've even started to look at, how many people have heard about JSON LD? It's an early candidate. I think it just went in like 3 months ago for linked data expression. W3C is going to probably validate it within the next couple of months. But you can do stuff like this. You can actually embed simple key value pairs right onto your page. And you can imagine what that would, in that setting, that becomes fairly easy to parse. Right? And it's almost human readable if you look behind the scenes. Again, on the front end, you're not going to see any of this. Like the difference between something with schema markup or JSON LD is kind of invisible to the browser and the front user. It's data for another user, which is bots or machines. So here's the big question. As I mentioned when we did the sort of environmental scan of these types of projects, it's been mostly focused on publishers. Publishers, they have a business question to answer, right? What do we do with ebooks? How do we build ebooks? Libraries have been kind of absent from the conversation. So part of our goal was bringing this to Access and talking through what might happen if our collective heads started to get around what we do with a book in a network setting. We were really interested in some sort of starting to apply some of the linked data and semantic web development concepts, and this project allowed us to do that. We really became interested in the ability to sort of break apart, atomize the book, and the ability that the different development opportunities that gives us. And then more importantly, if you remember that picture, we live with the legacy of print. But there's also there's an invitation that we can get if we find projects like this where we may have people within our staff who might not be as interested in, hey, I want to help you build a digital collection. But if you say, hey, what about if we reinvented the book? Somebody who's into long-form reading, we all have those people within our organization. And one of the things that Scott and I were talking about last night was just this part of our goal as creating opportunities for people outside of the tech world, outside of systems, is recognizing these opportunities where you could bring in other people in the organization that might not have anything to do with digital collections, right? But they'd be interested in helping you build a better book, right? So that was part of our agenda there. So that's it. A number of the links, slides. Oh, this stuff it's on GitHub. Please be kind because I did it. I kind of finalized it last night. It's a work in progress. But obviously, any contributions, code edits, we're open to any contributions people want to participate with. And you can find us there. Thanks.